it's Jay. I'm feeling a little under the weather today, but it's okay, we clock in. Let's talk about bridge piercing anatomy today. The bridge piercing goes in between your eyebrows and your nose. Now, there's a misconception that the bridge piercing goes directly in between your eyes. There's a correlation, but that's not exactly correct. Like, that's not true for everyone. For most of us, the space between our eyebrows and our nose curves inwards. So it gives a little space for there to be a bar. That's where the piercing goes. But it's a little trickier because you also need enough tissue in that area to support the piercing. So here's a really simple diagram of what good anatomy for this piercing looks like. You've got your curvature in the bone here, and the tissue here, the way it overlays allows for there to be extra tissue in that curvature, which means there's tissue to support the piercing. You don't want the piercing pressed up against the bone or on the skin on the surface. This would be a well-supported place for a piercing. So here's an example of bad anatomy for this piercing. The skin is flush to the bone. There's not a lot of excess tissue in that curved space where we want the piercing. So the piercing would be close to the surface of the skin and the bone. It's a lot of pressure and very little support. This piercing would most likely reject or at the very least migrate. In most professional spaces, this piercing is done with a straight barbell. So ball, ball, bar, right? However, I've been hearing some interesting discourse about using curved barbells or banana barbells, depending on the person's anatomy. Now, I don't know much about this. I am just sharing the discourse. Let me know if you know any information or tell me what you think in my comments. I'll tell you what I know. So the idea is that if you have a bridge that sticks out in this direction, you should be able to get a bridge piercing because that straight barbell fits in there. However, there are people who have the anatomy where their nose is relatively flat to their face. However, they still have that space in there. It's just not so prominent in this direction. It's got a lot more roundness. It blends into the face a little bit more. So in those situations, some people say that the curved bar fits better. So I can say for a fact that for certain anatomies, using the curved barbell is absolutely the wrong answer. I've seen some really poorly done bridges with curved barbells, and that jewelry has messed up the piercing in itself. However, with certain anatomies coming from certain communities, I'm inclined to believe that you can do this piercing with a curved barbell. And that is because we're talking about non-Eurocentric features. I think in piercing, a lot of us only have experience with white bodies and white features. And when we think about flatter noses, we're not looking for the prominence there. So maybe the straight barbell just doesn't fit the same. I can see it spatially in my head. I can totally see how in a certain circumstance, a curved barbell could work. Now again, I'm just gonna repeat myself. I don't have experience in this exact topic. So if you have information, leave it in my comments. I'd love to talk about it. And there are more things that you want to consider when doing an anatomy check for this piercing. This area experiences a lot of movement because it is directly connected to the expressions that we make on our face. For example, when we raise our eyebrows, the skin on our bridge gets pulled upwards with our eyebrows. So let's say theoretically, you mark the perfect spot on a relaxed expression. Once your client raises their eyebrows, if that tissue gets pulled in a way that doesn't support a piercing, that spot might actually not be beneficial for your client. You might want to mark a little bit lower within that curved space just to make up for that expression. Another example is if your client furrows their brow, some people have tissue that expands outwards a little bit when they make this expression. So in this case, you want to consider having slightly longer jewelry just to accommodate for this. You also want to ask your client if their lifestyle interferes with this piercing. For example, if they wear glasses and it directly interferes with the line of the piercing, or maybe they sleep very aggressively on their face. These are things that could really mess up that piercing. And this one scars very bad. So this is something you really want to think about. So if you don't have the anatomy for this piercing or your lifestyle kind of interferes with you getting it, there are some alternatives. For example, inner eyebrow piercings, so the little ones that kind of look like Shiva eyebrows, they're super cute. Although I do have questions about anatomy for that one. Another alternative is high nostrils. So you get a little piercing up here. Although neither of these are going to give you exactly what you're looking for, they're pretty close and they're both pretty cool options. So I hope this helps. Be safe. Happy healing. Bye.